everyone, it's Max, and welcome to my review of A Golden Fury by Samantha Coho. I was given this e-arc in exchange for an honest review from the publisher, so thank you so much. I am also part of the blog tour for this book, and I will leave all the details linked down below. By the time you're seeing this, the book will have already come out, so I will leave a link to its Barnes & Noble page down below. Before I get into the review, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the book. So this is about a girl named Thea, whose mother is a very, very famous alchemist, and she has trained Thea to follow in her footsteps. Well, when her mother gets very close to creating the Philosopher's Stone and goes mad, Thea has to take up that role, and she moves to England to find a father who doesn't even know she exists to create the Philosopher's Stone. Things go awry when she's kidnapped by Prussians to create the Philosopher's Stone in exchange for the man who she loves' life. And when she finds out that anyone who gets close to creating the Philosopher's Stone goes mad. Now, overall, I did enjoy this book. There were things that I had issues with, but for a debut author, I found the story to be really compelling. So first, I'm gonna go through my pros, and then I will be delving deeper into my cons. This is a somewhat spoiler-free review. I'm not going to spoil any big plot points or anything, but there are parts of the story that I will be talking about. The first thing that I really enjoyed was the writing. I think that the author, for a debut author, did a really great job at describing the world and the plot and keeping the action going, but also breaking those up with really good downtime scenes. She did a great job at making her main character likable, and I just found the plot to be very compelling, and I think she did a great job at writing it. The plot is also very interesting. I think the alchemy part of it is really great. I think she handles it really well with the politics and having bad guys and good guys, but none of them are cut and dry. I think each character is done really well, where they've got their strengths and their weaknesses and their bad parts and good parts, and it made them all feel like really flushed out, really well-written, realistic characters, even in a quite unrealistic setting. I also liked our main character. I think the author did a great job at, again, making her not perfect. I think she had a lot of flaws, but they make sense in the world that she was brought up in. I really liked how, even though it's one of my least favorite tropes, I don't like the absent mom, or not the absent mom, but the mom who just kind of sucks, who's just like a not great person to her daughter. I really don't like that trope at all, unless they are supposed to be the cut and dry villain. But I think that this was done really well because our main character knows that she's not a good mom, and she actively rebels against her in little ways that actually make a big difference. One thing that did kind of confuse me, though, is that there's a moment where she literally says, she was like, I choose my battles with my mom and to like rebel, and I'm like, you know, the biggest way you could rebel is to choose to not do alchemy, but she does alchemy. And I think would have been really interesting if it had been more either her mom hates alchemy and she was like, well, too bad, mom, I want to do alchemy, or vice versa, where her mom loves alchemy and she decides not to do it. But overall, I think she was a really good main character, strong and flawed, even though she didn't have a lot of character development. The last thing that I'm going to be talking about with pros is actually my favorite part of it, and that was kind of the social commentary on human greed. I think that this was the big theme throughout, and I think it was done really well, because each character in this will do whatever they need to get the Philosopher's Stone. If that includes torturing people, kidnapping people, and killing people, they will do it. And I think it's a very interesting commentary on humans and the lengths we're willing to go to get what we want. And I think it's done really well. There are comments about it, but I think it's done perfectly in the setting and the plot, and it's not in your face like, no, here's a comment about human greed. It's very subtle, and it's just worked in perfectly because the whole story is kind of an allegory almost for human greed. So whenever they talk about it, you can pick up on it, but it doesn't feel forced. I think it's done really well and really seamless, and I think it's just, it works so perfectly for, you could compare it to many different things in real life, and I think that makes each character really, really relatable and really realistic, because even though some of these characters are good people, they are still willing to do a lot to get what they want, and I think that that's just human nature, where even the best people have something where they are willing to do the worst things to get. And that includes Thea, that includes her friends, that includes her father and mother, and people who she barely knows. Each of them has a greed element, and they are all willing to go to drastic lengths to get what they want. For most of them, it is the Philosopher's Stone, but for a few of them, it is actually revenge or trying to hurt someone for hurting someone else. And I think that when it's just not just the Philosopher's Stone, it's really interesting because it's like, even though the main driving force is this stone, people still have other desires and other greeds, and I think that it was worked in really well. Alright everyone, so now going into the cons of the book. First one I'm going to be talking about is one that I briefly touched on a little bit earlier, and that is the bad parent trope. And now I'm not talking about if the parent is the actual villain. That I'm fine with, but it's just when the parent is a bad parent for no real reason. I'm just kind of sick of this trope. It might be because I have a great relationship with my mom, so I don't really like reading about bad moms, and I just can't connect to it, but I find this in so many books where the parent just kind of sucks, and there's no real reason for it, and they're just a bad parent. And I'm like, okay, but why? Why are they a bad parent? Did she have a terrible mother, an absentee mother? Is something else the matter? What's wrong? But when it's just not explained, they're just like, yeah, she just sucks. That you're like, why? And that did get to me. It's one of my least favorite tropes, and I just thought it was overdone. But if you do like this trope, I think it was well done. I can appreciate it because sometimes I will DNF a book over this where it's just so annoying. I find it very unnecessary and I hate it. And here at least I was able to be like, okay, yeah, no, this is fine. And it only is part of it for the first little bit, and that might be why. Like, I didn't have to go through that much of it before she shipped off to England. So I think that overall, like, even though it's one of my least favorite tropes, it was actually pretty well done in the book. So if you like the trope, then I think this will be really good for you as well. The next thing that I wasn't the biggest fan of was the under-explanation of the madness. Like, I don't know why the stone creates madness, and it's not explained. Literally, if people question it, our main character's like, what, you're willing to believe in a stone that keeps people immortal, but not a craziness? And it's like, while I get that, I still wish there was more. I still wish there was some sort of explanation, especially because it affects every person differently. If it had all been the same effect where they all see hallucinations, all hear voices, and all like, if it does something very specific and it's the same all around, then I think I'd be able to be okay with it more, because then I'd be like, okay, it's probably a compound where it causes hallucinations or something like that. But it affects every single person differently, and with that, I liked it less because I feel like it was just kind of a little bit of a cop-out. I do like the idea of it driving someone mad, but I wish there was an explanation as to why. And even if it wasn't like actually like explained at face value, I think if everyone had been affected the same way, you could draw your own conclusions. You could be like, yeah, it's probably just a compound in the process part, you know, whatever. I don't know how to make a Philosopher's Stone, but you know, in the science that creates these hallucinations, then I'd be more on board because that makes sense to me. But when it's just willy-nilly and you're just like, I don't know, I'm a little bit hesitant to enjoy it. Another thing that I wasn't a huge fan of was the female characters, and there were only 4, and one of them is only referenced. There are a lot of men, and they're all very deep, and they all have backstories, and they all have their own wants and desires and issues, but the women are just bland. The main character is the best, which at least there's that, but the mom is just a bad mom and she goes crazy. That's all you get. And then this girl who is kind of the kidnapper of our main character is pretty bland. You don't get anything from her. She's just there. And her sister, who's only mentioned, is the worst of all. She's the worst of all of them because she is the type of woman where she is so weak that she falls in love with a guy, and then when she's rejected, she tries to kill herself. And that's her whole personality. I hate it. I hate when women are just that bland, where men are given these great backstories and you really flush out what they want from life, and then the women are just like, here's a two-dimensional thing. And all of them were. And I expect it more from a male author, I'm gonna be honest. And so when a female author writes that way, I just like it even less, because I'm like, you're kind of doing your sex a disservice. And my sex a disservice. And yeah, so that always kind of gets to me, and it really did this time, because like I said, there's only 4 female characters, one of which is only referenced, and 3 out of the 4 are super two-dimensional, especially the mom. And this kind of ties back to the bad parenting trope, where I wish we got more of why she is like she is. If we got a backstory where her mom sucked or abused her, or she grew up in an orphanage, so she just had no parental figure or guideline, I'd get it more. I'd understand why she's the way she is, but we get nothing from her. And so she just feels bland. All these female characters, except our main character, feel really bland, and it was just unfortunate. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is the French Revolution setting. I don't know why it's set during this time, and I don't know why it's marketed. Like, sure, base it in France and England during this time, whatever, but the fact that it's like taking place during the French Revolution, it didn't do anything for the plot. It's literally just a device to get her out of France, but I think that could have been done very easily any other way. I went in expecting political intrigue and the French Revolution to be really the center of everything, but it's really not. And I think that this could have been fixed if, say, the leader of France had hired her mom to create the Philosopher's Stone, and then she's kidnapped by Prussia, and so she's almost working against her mom. Or something like that, where the leaders of these countries actually are part of it, or the politics are actually part of it. Because then I'd understand the draw of the French Revolution. Or maybe she's working for the revolutionaries against the political leader of France. At this time, I can't remember if it's Louis or if Napoleon has taken control. That's why I'm not naming names, even though I know who it is. Like, during this time, I can't remember, like, when in the French Revolution this happens. So it's just like, I wish that it had been more part of the plot than just like a throwaway line here and there and a reason for her to leave France, because I think it would have been really, really interesting. And I think it would have added a whole nother layer to the human greed commentary and our characters. And I just think it would have added a whole other component to the story if she had focused more on the French Revolution than it just being a ploy to get our main character out of France. Next thing I'm going to be talking about is our main character's expectations. So she leaves France, goes to England to find her dad, and she assumes that her dad is automatically going to accept her and love her and be so excited to have this daughter he never knew about. Like, someone literally asks her, like, well, what if your dad doesn't want you? Or like, what if your dad, you know, you can't expect your dad to take care of you? She goes, well, why wouldn't he? And I'm like, because he didn't know you were real. And so she goes to England. She's disappointed when her dad doesn't immediately jump for joy and accept her and name her his heir. And I'm like, how did you expect any different when your mother never romanticized him? She didn't even know who her dad was until she was sent to England. It's like, why do you have these unrealistic expectations of this man you didn't even know about until like 2 days ago? And it just didn't make sense. And I wish she had gone in with more hesitancy, or if she had had character development around it, where she was like, yes, he's gonna love me, because who doesn't love me? And then he doesn't. She gets angry, but then over the course of the book, she realizes that that was unfair, and she matures, and she talks to her dad about it, and being like, listen, I understand that that was unfair of me to put you in that position, and then be angry when you didn't accept me. And then they could have had a stronger bond going forward. Well, in the book, it's just kind of like, she gets angry, leaves, and then everything wraps up. And it's just kind of like, I wish that there had been more character growth in her from that perspective and in that storyline. All right, and then the last thing I'm gonna be talking about is the character's motivations. So our main character knew about the madness for most of the book. This is before going to England, before getting kidnapped by the Prussians, and she still decides to continue trying to create the Philosopher's Stone. And I don't really understand why. Like, she knows she's going to go mad while doing this, and she still goes on with it. And I wish that this had been explained in a different way. Maybe there's a competition where whoever wins, whoever creates the Philosopher's Stone first, becomes the king's, like, right-hand alchemist, or the rebellion leader's right-hand alchemist, or they get a cash prize, and maybe her family's destitute, and she's got a great relationship with her mom, or she left her mom, and she has no money, and so the cash prize would, like, help her live. I would get that. Or say she's got a great relationship with her mom and her mom's super sick and creating the Philosopher's Stone would heal her. Any of these reasons would work. I would be like, great, yes, I understand why she's doing it. I understand why she's risking the madness to make this Philosopher's Stone. But there's no real motivation here except human greed, which I get, but I still wish there was something more to it, because it's like, okay, so you're just sacrificing your whole life for nothing except a boy, which I'm not a big fan of. And I'm just like, I wish there had been more. I wish it wasn't just her throwing her life away for no real reason. I wish that it had been one of the things I talked about, or something completely different, but just some sort of motivation, some actual physical, like, what are you going to get out of this? Because she doesn't really seem that interested in immortality. She doesn't really seem to care. It's all about, like, just being like, yes, I'm the one who created it, which I get the human greed, I get the bragging rights, but I wish there had been more to it than just that. I wish there was something tangible that she would have won that would have made it all worth it, because it wasn't. But overall, I did enjoy it. I had a really fun time reading it, and I ended up giving it a 3.25 out of 5 stars. If any of these things that I talked about that I liked or I didn't like, you know you would like, please pick it up, because it was really fun. It was a great debut novel by a new author. So thank you so much to the publisher for sending this my way and asking me to be part of the blog tour, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!